Hey, welcome back to the Personality Hacker podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
Today we have a special guest, Susan Olesek from the Enneagram Prison Project. Susan, welcome to Personality Hacker.
Goodness, thanks for letting me be here.
Letting you be here. It was like a year it took us to schedule this, didn't it? It was like we had to go back and forth with schedule because one of the things I appreciate about you is you're on mission in your life. You have this Enneagram Prison Project you run, and it's passionate. It's something you're focused on, and an interview with us is important, but not as important the stuff that comes up with your work. So talk a little bit about your work, some of the reasons why it was so hard to schedule you. What are you up to? What is your mission in life, Susan?
Oh, well, thank you for that. I feel like I am really true to type 1, which I relate to all the time. I'm really on a mission to help people understand why we do what we do, probably not unlike you two. I feel that with Enneagram Prison Project, especially the people who are, the most marginalized, most hurting among us are the people who are sitting behind bars, who are really starving for some resources to figure out the answer to that question. And the Enneagram is such a perfect tool to help people to gain self-awareness and self-compassion. Truly, I think that's really the way the Enneagram has always been intended, and therefore some self-regulation.
So Enneagram Prison Project, I envision, when I hear that, before I kind of knew what was going on, I was like, okay, Enneagram Prison Project, what in the world could that entail? Like, what are you actually doing on a day-to-day basis? Are you teaching people that are incarcerated the Enneagram system for personal growth? Are you using it to help them develop skill sets when they're finished with their incarceration? Like, how are you using this? How does this look?
Yeah, well, I would say yes to both of those things. And to me, the Enneagram is a system that helps us to remember what's right with us, what's been right all along, and how we forgot that. I'm using the Enneagram as a way to highlight what we call, our many authors refer to as the essential qualities, the highest parts of ourselves, the essence, the gem inside of everybody. And we start with that. And I actually think that's one of the most confusing places to start with most folks. And I teach the Enneagram in lots of places. I think it's also a very confusing place to start for people in business and high schoolers and pretty much anybody else, because we all just sort of fall into this self-hatred. And how does that happen? That happens from the way we started our lives. That's our approach. We start with the basic building blocks of personality, which is what happened to us. And our premise is that there's nothing wrong with you.
In this project, can you tell us a little bit about the history of how you found this to be your passion and some of the challenges you may have experienced in the beginning, so we can kind of give a narrative or story around. I always understand people's passions and their work. We've been calling it their dharma. I understand it when I can understand the etymology of how it happened. So can you share a little bit about the etymology of this project?
Yeah, sure. Well, starting with myself, I've always been somewhat of a seeker, whether it was spiritually or in religion. When I was much younger, I always wanted to sort out the why of me. And I also started from trauma, which I think everybody does, and in varying degrees. And I was somebody who was hurting and I had no idea. So I was really using my personality to survive and get by things. I learned the Enneagram when I was a new mom, and very quickly it made sense to me. I went to a parenting class to understand the tool. And I thought it was a really helpful resource. It became a quick resource for me and my partner. Somewhere after my youngest child was about 2, so I've been a parent for almost 9 years at that time, I was going to die if I didn't do something with myself besides be a mom, and which is and has been the best vocation for me. And I certified to become an Enneagram teacher. I felt like I passed the bar. It was really hard for me. I'm not an academic. I am a people person. I've always loved people. And I was in human resources before I was a mom. The first place I got invited to go teach the Enneagram, first I had a little class in my living room with less than 10 folks. I found my way into a church with about 40 people. And then I got invited to prison. And I taught as part of an entrepreneurship program that was in existence in Texas. That's when I would say I got really convicted about what was possible with the Enneagram, because I saw folks that were really dealing with tremendous life circumstances and things that had happened to them. And they were using the Enneagram to completely changed the way they saw the world and also the way they saw themselves. And I'll tell you, that is the moment when I really realized that I was teaching something that I had yet to learn, because I hadn't unpacked my own childhood. I hadn't really figured out all the things that happened to me. I didn't get the gravitas of all of that for myself. I came to a deeper appreciation of the Enneagram by working with students who used the tool the way I think I instinctively knew it was supposed to be used, but I didn't know how to do that for me. And then I got super inspired, and I started to do a lot of therapy, and I figured out a lot more things about myself. And I saw the traction that we were getting with our students on the inside. And I worked at this prison that was in Texas. It's a long way from California, and I had young kids at home. And after about 4 years, I found myself a local jail closer to me, about 22.2 miles from my house. And they couldn't pronounce the Enneagram. They didn't know what the heck it was, but I had made a little film inside that Texas prison with this beautiful cinematographer who's really a magician. I showed them the film, and they just sort of on their own instincts, this type 9 program manager said yes, because she felt like I did. She really wanted something more for the women and men in her care. And we started off in a little jail, and not a little, it's actually the biggest jail in Santa Clara, 4,000 beds, I believe, in there. I had 12 men who stayed after. We started with about 20 after a 12-week course. And that was sort of the beginning. And from there it grew that I started to work with women. They started to say, could you teach, these 8 other places in the jail? And I was pretty overwhelmed. I think at that point, just more and more support from people that were all around me, and people like Dr. David Daniels, who was my mentor, and I had started to teach a little bit with him in the local community. I'll tell you, the thing that happened is just that the Enneagram worked. People could recognize themselves on that map, and they could see the way back to that essential quality. They needed guidance. And it became really clear to me that I wasn't really a teacher. I was equally a student, but I was a guide. And that's what we call our folks who are helping people to understand the system in jail now. We call them guides. And from that jail, we got a grant from the county, and having county money to do this work with the Enneagram was really radical and exciting for us. And we were stretched very thin. I was teaching at 1.6 classes a week, and we knew we had to put together a guide training program, and we did probably 6 versions of that before we have the one that we are using now. And along the way, I've been talking about the project for the last decade, and there just became more and more traction. So eventually we started to program in a different county jail. I was invited then to speak at San Quentin. And as we put together the guide training program, the people in the Enneagram community who came were folks from Finland and from, Minnesota and places that were not nearby. And I just have a motto of sort of following the green lights, and I just kept responding to what showed up. I didn't have a real map. I'm not a business planner, but I am a good person on my gut.
Here you're running a nonprofit at this point. Like today, as you sit here talking with us, this is something you probably never imagined for yourself. You're running a nonprofit, working with people that are incarcerated, using the Enneagram. What a unique situation, not just in what you're doing in like the prison systems and the jail systems, but probably just for yourself. Like I bet you never imagined yourself at the top of an organization and having to run these things. Is that true?
Yeah, it is, and it's not. I'm definitely a visionary person. I definitely see the big picture. And without a doubt, I left that prison in Texas saying this system needs to be taught to every incarcerated person in California, in the United States, in the world. And I really feel that, and I felt that at that time to my toes. But I am not a logistics person necessarily. I'm not a systems mind. I am married to that person. And I think that the reason Enneagram Prison Project exists is because of the person that I'm partnered with, and also because of the people that we've attracted together and how we roll. And there's a lot of moving parts inside of the organization. I can see that very clearly that our approach to using the Enneagram is not even just for the incarcerated, it actually is for anybody. And we're starting to work with high schoolers and in churches and in different populations that are not incarcerated. So that to me is also really clear. The how to and the running an organization, the being a thought leader, those things I'm a little slower to come to, especially in how I see myself.
Yeah. Well, and I think What that triggers in me is as people come to work with you, you talked about this group from Finland, you talk about volunteers, people that are helping out to contribute, the partnerships you're forming. We often look at the work we do as people helping I'll call it the end user, the person that's incarcerated. But I bet you people that come and volunteer and work with you and work with your organization get a lot out of this too in the giving part. Like both parties are learning something and getting a lot of ahas, and it's probably powerful for both parties on both sides of the equation.
Yeah, I call what you're talking about divine reciprocity. It's exactly how I felt when I went into the jail. I went in hoping to offer something, but really received something I was completely missing. I had no idea. And so part of our mission is we, inspire transformation using the Enneagram on both sides of the bars. And so it's very negotiable who's getting more. And many times we debate about it with our students. I think requiring extremely developed present people to go in so that they can also receive the gifts that are there to leave with. Our students are amazing. And sitting next to anybody who's really willing to ask themselves questions that they've never asked before and be present to the answers that come up, be present to their own beauty. That's a really cool thing, no matter where we do it.
I'm particularly attracted to what you're doing for a couple different reasons. First, I love anybody who's on a mission, right? I love people. I love seeing people on their path. And so I think just talking to anybody who's on their path is special for me. Because then when you hear examples of it, you can kind of deconstruct how they're showing up and what they're doing. And then I think it helps inspire other people to be on a path. But what you're doing specifically, I have a sense of simpatico with, because I feel like it's so easy to throw people away. We have a habit of doing that. We have a very consumeristic...
or forget them, right?
It's there's a lot of feelings about anybody who is in prison that... like they deserve to be there somehow, and anything that happens to them is sort of the consequence of their action. And I think there's a growing sentiment that is very uncomfortable with that feeling. There's a growing sentiment, I think, in society that really nobody deserves to be thrown away, and that people are oftentimes products of the systems that are around them. And so when somebody reaches out to a group of people who, again, are very easy to neglect, ignore, or quote unquote throw away, like that's, to me, that's exceptionally beautiful. And so I'd love to hear if you have examples or stories or sort of an insight into not just how you guys are benefiting, which I love the concept of divine reciprocity. I love that phrase. I think I'm going to steal it. So it's a win for you guys on the side of being able to give this and then receive lessons. But can you give some stories or examples of how it's impacting people with something specific, how it's impacting people who are on, quote unquote, the other side of the bars?
Well, first of all, I think that the way that most of us tend to regard the people who are in jail or in prison are using the prison system in a bit of a mirror unconsciously. We don't know how we treat ourselves until we start to look at something like the Enneagram. And we also, it's much easier to hate something I don't like about me by locating it in a prison than it is to recognize that's actually my reflection. And so that's the shadow side of all of us. Like, it's much easier to project that out. And so we are, many people in the administration and us in society who are funding the way our correctional systems are run, don't really want to do the hard work that actually Enneagram Prison Project is inviting those that are incarcerated to do. It's hard to look at ourselves. And so we project those things because it's the only way we know how to do it, and it's unconscious. When we go inside and we create what we feel is just really very sacred space and a safe, what I mean by that is a psychological safe place, an emotionally safe place to begin to look at ourselves. It's amazing what happens. I'm very inspired by Carl Rogers in this unconditional positive regard. And when we meet someone there, he calls that being a companion to someone, which makes me tearful, that word. And it's similar to what it feels like to call ourselves guides. We're not really there with the answers. We're just sort of coming alongside people and meeting them wherever they are, even if that's in a ton of self-hatred or what would outwardly seem like arrogance. It's everything's interesting, and everything that is met with curiosity and with openness, because that's what's showing up, is able to transform. And it's only when we meet it with resistance that we keep it where it is. So what we find is when we show up like that, every single class is filled with, I mean, your question is a beautiful question, but I'm a little overwhelmed. Like, well, how much time have you got, right?
Yeah.
You're like, every single one of our students is like that. And I just graduated with a brand new apprentice, a women's class in the jail yesterday. And there are 8 women in the end. I think we started with about 20, and the movement happens because people get released, people go to prison, people move. There's just things that happen. But we had 8 really steady women. And I could not make up the stories of the things that happened to these women. You wouldn't want to, it's atrocities and violations. And we had one woman who, every time there would be a break, she would just not come back. And whenever that happened, we just noted it, that she disappeared. And then the next time we saw her, we'd say, hey, we noticed that you didn't come back. You doing okay? How's this course for you? We really like it when you stay. You have some really cool insights. And she couldn't pick a type. It was her second time trying to take the class. I know it seems like a small story, but not really, because one of the things we ask our students to do in the 7 homework assignments they have, one of them is to write a biography in the third person. And that assignment is straight out of the Wisdom of the Enneagram book. It's a good assignment for a reason. And she did that assignment. And when we started to hear the things that had happened to her, we have so much compassion and understanding for why it's hard to stay in a class, why it's hard to stay with herself, right? It's not a surprise. We have begun to use the adverse childhood experience assessment to help people to understand what were those kinds of things that happen, how are they even traumatic, because those things are so normalized. And they start to have a lot of epiphanies about, wow, this was not just everyday, childhood. This was really rough stuff. There are people who have been incarcerated, in and out for 28. I've just met a man in our recent class in San Quentin, 47 years. So how does somebody find something beautiful about themselves after 47 years? By being in the presence of somebody who says, you're okay, you're enough. And it's amazing how little of that unconditional positive regard it takes for somebody to take a turn back to themselves. It doesn't take much.
We were recently talking to a friend, and they were talking about disassociated feelings, and how one of the challenges of being present is that if you've got a lot of feelings, disassociated feelings or challenges from the past that you haven't processed or cycled through, when you're present, all of that stuff starts to fight, almost bottlenecks, because all that stuff is trying to fight to get some attention, some time. And I would imagine that if a person had experienced a life like you're talking about, being in a class that is asking them to be present and having all that stuff just sort of now race to screaming for some attention. What are some of the things that you guys do to help keep somebody in that state and then sort of know that it's going to be okay, that this is a process that they walk through? Is that something that you guys ever experience in your classes?
For sure. And especially with the women, because, we're sort of creatures who need to talk. That's really true about us. And so there are lots and lots of tears, and also for the men. And we let them know, kind of like you're just doing in the way you phrase the question, Antonia, that we let them know what to expect and what psychologically is just the way our systems are organized, so that they don't judge themselves for being that way. And we always are reminding them, this self-acceptance thing is for real, that if we can meet ourselves with some self-acceptance, then those feelings can start to be okay. And also that this, sense of when we tap into something that's good in us, that the term for what happens, when they leave our class, or even for the other folks who go to a workshop and they leave, that ab reaction where your ego comes up tenfold, that's just to be expected. And that's because we like to keep things the way that they're normal. So the one thing that we do, we really use the narrative tradition in our work, and we're constantly inviting people to report out about how things were for them. And we aren't afraid of people being really, really upset. And sometimes, we start a panel and we just say, tell me something about yourself that you relate to in this type. And the person will start with, well, I was molested when I was 5. That's their opening remark. And so I think people have a sense that, wow, here's a present witness, and finally have a chance to be heard. And so we have to be really good at, yes, creating a psychologically and emotionally safe container in the room, but also to be that psychological and emotionally safe guide at the front. And what we're inviting folks to do from the get-go is to know that they are 100% emotionally responsible for themselves, and that we believe that they can hold themselves. And that's the starting point. And where that becomes negotiable is when all of that stuff wants to come rushing out. And we say, you didn't really get a fair start to know how to hold these things. And your brain hasn't had the support it needs to create those neural pathways. And we can reparent. So we do a lot of this, nurturing and helping them to know it's okay where you are.
Some of those are like sort of basic therapeutic, techniques. And also the Enneagram comes in as something that is, that almost, well, I would imagine, let me actually ask you this question because I'm thinking out loud as we're talking. Is it that the Enneagram provides almost like a narrative, like a story, like a way for them to meet themselves or kind of connect to their identity and give them sort of a talking point, so that as they're going through the story of who they are and their identity and how it relates to, these 9 types, then a lot of this other stuff can come out in almost like a safe way. Because I've noticed that what typologies do is they give us like 1 degree of separation from a bunch of stuff, because it's like, oh, this is just a pattern of how people are. But then in that narrative, because there's that 1 degree of separation, it's like it gives space for a bunch of stuff to flood and come in that otherwise without that tool might be just too much. But it's like you can always sort of lean back and get back into the conceptual level if you need to, if it's just getting too much for you. Is that kind of the methodology or how it's working, or am I completely off base and it's working in a different way?
Absolutely. Completely agree with you. Absolutely. Particularly with the levels, which is the huge contribution from Don Riso and Russ Hudson about seeing that the way that we came out of our childhood is directly related to how much presence we're able to tolerate. And our students really like to find themselves in those levels. And many people say level 9, that's how I got in here. And maybe they're only seeing they're at level 6. And then some people really want to skip and hang out at type, level 1. And it's just a nice way for people to start to recognize that behavior is something that I've been doing. And what's helpful about picking a type, even or especially if the inroad is just about the crappy thing that I've done and the level that I see myself at when I got here or not that recently, is that gets them into some sort of way or state where they can relate to a type. And then we invite them to recognize, well, if you just glance up, right, like if you relate to that level 6, then that means that the level 1 qualities, those are also in you. You can't just have the bad stuff. And so again, it's like a backdoor to help them to ultimately come back to this self-love, which is a pretty ridiculous proposition in prison. We like to lead with it.
So you're talking about the book, The Wisdom of the Enneagram, which in each of those chapters has 9 levels of health that a person can go through. And
they call them the levels of development in the book, and we call them levels of presence. I've heard Russ many times say, how much presence can you tolerate? And I love that question. And the development is all related to our basic attachment with our parents, right? The nurture that we got or didn't get, and protection that we didn't get or did get. By using those different levels, we can start to identify what has been going on with us and have some immediate compassion for why I wouldn't be able to be present for myself.
That book, Wisdom of the Enneagram, outlines each of those 9 levels of development, and we strongly recommend you go check it out because it provides a nice roadmap. I'm assuming that that's one of the things it does, is that it almost gives a roadmap to the individual, not just to see that what they're capable of. Like you mentioned, if a person feels that they're at level 6, and in those levels of development, 9 is at the bottom and 1 is at the top, if you look at it as a vertical model. And so if a person sees themselves at 6, you were mentioning talking about what it looks like if they're at 1 almost gives like a sense of hope that that's in you. But I would also imagine that it creates like a guide, like a roadmap for them to go through and know, okay, well, if I'm not at 1, that's okay because I've got all these other levels I got to go through. And I'm imagining it's similar to other models where you can't skip steps.
I just want to bring some clarity here for somebody that might be really new and has never heard about the Enneagram before. Remember, there's 2 types of numbers you're talking about. You're bringing clarity to this. There's your type, the number that is your type. These numbers you're talking about are outside of the horizontal type that you are. These are development levels to each type. So like I'm a type 6, there'd be 9 levels of development for type 6. That's what you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Very helpful. And And that is a confusing thing to do auditorily without actually looking at it. So I'm glad Antonia is recommending check that book out. It's the book that we use as our go-to text, of course, in jail and prison.
Right. And so to go back to what I was talking about, there's at least for me, I remember when I first read The Wisdom of the Enneagram many years ago, and I diagnosed myself on those levels of development, it almost felt like if I was going up a level and I wasn't quite transcended the whole thing, like if I wasn't, I hadn't arrived, but I had gone up in a level of development, or at least I could track that, it made me feel good that I had made progress. And so a part of it was just being able to see progress, even if I'm not at the place where, is like the most transcended version of my type.
Yeah, and I think that's it too, back to what we were talking about earlier, that we just start where we start. And if I need to track my progress, and that's where I'm at, like that, let that be a fine way to grow and develop. And then, the higher, in air quotes, that we get in those levels of presence, the less we're actually tracking that stuff. It's like pride and humility, that as soon as I start to, I might just give you something altruistically. And then the moment that I want you to notice that I did it, then boom, I'm like right out of the humility and into the pride. And that's how those things work. And I think that's how the Enneagram is a map for us all, like what you're talking about exactly.
So you started out by, like, it wasn't accidental. You knew that you had to go do something. And so you went and did something. And then it ended up sticking. And then it ended up being, I have this theory that whenever anything is what it's supposed to be, it ends up almost like it's on rails, and then it gains momentum and traction. And then all of a sudden you're here where you've got an outreach now of, it sounds like multiple countries and, people, it sounds like all over the world doing this. So where are you at right now? Kind of give a picture of where the Enneagram Prison Project is at right now, and what you would like, basically what you'd like to see in the future. As somebody who holds the vision, what's the vision for this project?
What a cool question. Well, we are really using the Enneagram all over the place. We have 6 different prisons running in Belgium. We've just got a new program happening in Paris. We're operating a new program out of the UK. Australia is ready to hit the ground. And we've moved into other states in the United States, namely Minnesota, and we're looking at Colorado as our next territory, and on and on. And we're contacted a lot. So the truth is, we're not in a race. We know this is a marathon, and we feel like we're about in the starting blocks, that we're just, responding to what happens. And you're right, there's a lot of traction. So we know it's meant to be everywhere. And how we get there is a matter of what shows up to us. We're also finding that we've had many, many requests to use the Enneagram use our curriculum in non-traditional places. So currently we have a grant through the school to be offering our program at Los Gatos High School for about 220 juniors and seniors, some of them from social justice English classes and some of them just regular English classes. And this is the town where I live, and so I'm pretty motivated to be supporting the school. I've been volunteering at the school for the last 3 years with the seniors, and teaching the Enneagram, and then bringing a panel of ambassadors into the school, and then bringing them into San Quentin as a visit. And it's been life-changing for those students, and also for the students on the inside who have young people coming to visit them and understanding and witnessing what kind of transformation is possible. That has been a very validating thing, because we feel that, I feel that the more I teach, the more I teach the same. I used to feel like, well, the Norteños were going to be this difficult population, or, the women were going to be different, or my corporate clients were going to be different. And now I really don't do any of that any different. And that's been the thing that has made my work, I think, most resonant, is that everybody's in a prison of our own making in the way we suffer ourselves. And the fact that I know that to be true informs the way that I teach, and the way, of course, that I'm training people. And we have a whole faculty of people that are part of that training program. We see that I call myself on the non-EPP side a human potentialist, and we see that this human potentialist organization is something that can hold all of us. And that I've been like this human bridge where I working with corporate clients, and then I'm working on the inside, and I'm always telling stories about each of the other populations to the other side. And now we're finding ways to bridge all that together using the same curriculum, and we have Enneagram Teen Project, and we'll have others as we go. So to me, it's like a foregone conclusion, but all the way back to the logistics, I'm glad I have my partner Rick as a real systems brain from Stanford. He's engineering all the ways that we can keep track of this stuff, and it's very exciting because I feel like the Enneagram it's really wanted, it's really needed more than ever.
Addressing people who are incarcerated, you mentioned at the beginning of this conversation that this is society's shadow side. This idea of actually using a tool like the Enneagram to address the shadow of society is effectively what the Enneagram was designed for to begin with, right? Is to do shadow work.
Right. Yeah. I remember sitting with, Don Riso was my teacher, and I was sitting in an Enneagram Institute training, and I had just made the first film that I was talking about. And I think Russ walked by and happened to see it. And I went up to talk with Don, and he said exactly what you said. He said, this is why we got into this work in the first place. And David Daniels, he was a huge proponent of the project from the very beginning, before we were even, a .org organization. I think the teachers, who've gone before all of us, who set up the schools and set up all the learning for all of us, they've known that that's what the Enneagram was meant to do. And I'm not, good at quoting the Bible, but they do say the last shall be first. And I feel that the people that are going to be and are proving to us from EPP that they're the best guides of this system are those who have been really down at the bottom of those levels. That's like almost the deeper that we've been in our hurt and our pain, the higher we can transcend that, because we know what it is on either side. So we have a mind to create villages, all over the country and all over the world, where these ambassadors of the Enneagram can be in a position where finally people can come and just sit at their feet and hear, how did you do that? Because it's not about being, using all the fancy jargon. It's about making it real and making it relevant. And that's the thing that I think our students on the inside, they will not tolerate something that's not that. They're not looking for some theoretical. They're looking for a solution that works.
It really changes my perspective. We're here at Personality Hacker, we're in the type community space, and you're applying typology, the Enneagram system, to a very unique application, a really unique access point. And then it almost renders the online arguments and conversations and disagreements about people that say, well, this is how type should be used, and it kind of renders all that silly as far as like the understanding of the system itself, because there's so much argument at like the system level, which can be valuable, kind of an academic exercise or interesting exercise. But what I love about what you're doing and what the Enneagram Prison Project really brings to us, I think, in the world, is that you are showcasing the tangibleness, the realness, the grittiness, like you talked about. It's a real thing you're doing with it, and it highlights how much this system can be used for good and to positively affect people. And it just reframes, I think, all of us to go, you know what? It's not about getting type 1 exactly right about how it should show up in a person. It's about, like you said, it's about how they're using that. And it doesn't even matter sometimes really what type somebody might think they are. I mean, it can be helpful, but often it's about the work they're doing anyway, right? And I wonder if that's something that you guys have really noticed in doing this.
Yeah, I agree with all of what you're saying. Russ Hudson's come into San Quentin with us many times, and he tells the men, this is the real Enneagram. From a mind who could write a book like The Wisdom of the Enneagram, I think, and that's the 5 anyway, right? Wants to know what's real and to be able to tell the difference. So the Enneagram is the thing that lets us be able to tell the difference between the false thing inside of ourselves and the real things inside of ourselves. It can be so easy to be distracted and make it this theoretical pursuit. But we have people who are doing life sentences in San Quentin, and maybe for the first 20 years they're not even allowed to see the parole board, and then they have to go demonstrate insight, that's what they call it, to the parole board, to a committee of people, and answer really hard probing questions like, how come you did what you did, and other people have had those hard circumstances and they didn't do it, what was different for you? And they're provocative and they're intense. So I can't rely on theory when I'm in a conversation like that. And we need the parole board because we do need people to be able to articulate their inner experience in a way that convinces us and is real, that they're not a threat to themselves or to anybody. And truly, I know we'll get a chance to hear from one of our ambassadors on the next episode, but this is what the ambassadors bring to us, is that they can talk about the things that they've been through and the things that they've done with a measure of self-connection that actually makes them infinitely safe. And when somebody is able to use the Enneagram like that, it's far from theory.
That's something that's kind of been missing in our study of and mastery of Myers-Briggs. And we're getting more and more sensitive to, when you're doing growth work, how important it is to have an energetic or a spiritual component in there. And one of the things our energy coach said is that nothing changes until the energy moves. I feel like when we interview people who are on a mission, a noble mission, one that we want to give attention to, I think almost more than what they say, it's the energy they show up with, which gets communicated to the person listening. And I think the energy is the thing that actually is what helps shifts people. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And so even more so than what you were saying, I just really wanted to be able to capture your energy, because I think the energy is what causes people to gain attention and sort of shift into it. And you can tell when somebody is super aligned with what they're doing because it shows up in their energy. And I just wanted to make sure we captured that from you so that the person could hear it.
I think that's so well put. And I do think that's why it works so well, because Rick calls that the secret sauce. That's what I mean by we love them, but it doesn't work as well when we don't love ourselves, because then we're kind of full of it. And that's what happened to me in Texas. People were sitting around and my client asked them, well, what was it like to work with the Enneagram? And they were saying these amazing things. And then she said, what was it like to work with Susan? And they started to cry. And I was in that moment where I was like, whoa. So if I don't accept this, then I'm full of it too, right? I have to be in that reciprocity. Otherwise, it's not actually real. I think the magical thing about the Enneagram is that it is the why before the what. It's not about just I'm this box of behaviors. It's about the thing that's driving me to be that. And that part is really explained. Like the Enneagram really takes care of that for us. And once we recognize that we created this structure as a survival system that helped us to be okay with something when we knew that it wasn't safe to be who we are, then the structure starts to break down, because we recognize if we're safe enough, right, that we don't actually need it the way we once needed it. And when that starts to happen, it becomes a spiritual conversation, because something else is holding me. Now, I don't lead with that when I teach in corporations or in prison, but anybody who's on the path who gets that, sometimes that can come up in the first class. I love that you're highlighting it and that you're bringing that kind of energetic work into your own practice, because it's a game changer.
Yeah, I think we're moving to a time period where, I mean, there's advantages and disadvantages to a postmodern world, right? Like the disadvantages, everybody thinks they're an expert on everything and everybody's voice is equal on everything, which is, I think, a response to this whole lab coat mentality of the modernist view, right? Where we just hand our power over to experts. The other side of the pendulum of that is everybody gets to be an expert on everything. But I think what will cut the sort of the wheat from, or separate the wheat from the chaff, is the energetic alignment somebody has with what they're talking about. And you can see this absolute craving for authenticity, this craving for something that's real and authentic. And I think the energy alignment is the thing that creates that realness. I think the other thing, I didn't mention this, but the other thing that I love about what you're doing is that you're physically going to these locations and you're in the same room with people. There's been a lot of conversations around epidemics of loneliness and isolation that people feel. And I'm sure it's magnetized 1,000 times when you're in prison, like this sense of just loneliness and the energetic disconnect you feel from the rest of humanity.
Well, exactly. Yes, to what you're saying, that the foundation of a healthy development inside for personality is the attachment relationship, that how much we have from our protective and our nurturing caretakers. And by and large, most of our students didn't have that. Parents disappeared, dad was in prison, mom was on drugs, both were gone. I was in the foster care system. I was raised by my grandparents, everybody died. Like, you cannot imagine the amount of early childhood loss people have suffered. And so that fundamental foundational holding did not exist. Mm-hmm. And so I guess, and yet we have this drive to attach and connect. We are driven, social, emotional creatures. And so if I don't have someone that will love me, that will remind me that I'm lovable, then I will attach with something else. And that's why addiction is so prominent in the people who we are serving, because they're just trying to get away from the pain of this lack of attachment. And we really destigmatize addiction because it's a tragedy to be. It's like people have already suffered the emotional loss. That's why they're using drugs and selling to try to get the drugs in the first place. But they do not need punishment. What they need is healing.
Yeah, and then to have people physically be in their location, somebody who, like you mentioned, has worked on themselves and really developed themselves, and so can be the like almost like a center point in a room of positive, high vibration energy. And then it speaks to people who are just craving that energy, and it can then cross pollinate, and like I feel like even just showing up is a big piece of it. And then the rest of it is the story you use to work through all this stuff. But
yeah,
we're really, because we're in a digital context, right? Like most of what we do is sell, we produce digital products, and everything we do is so virtual. We're starting to understand that we have to go into a physical space. Like that's what people are craving, is community and energetic interchange. And so what we're working on now is more gatherings, meetups, people getting in each other's physical space. And that's powerful for just the every person. That's powerful. And I can imagine it's just like so much more powerful to somebody who's been lacking that their whole life.
Well, maybe you should come to jail.
Yeah, I'm thinking about it.
I love this phrase you just used. People don't need more punishment, they need healing. And that's easy to look at. Not easy, excuse me. It's direct to look at when you're looking at incarceration rates, which to me, I don't believe in punishment. I only believe in discipline. I think punishment's stupid. It's the dumbest thing ever to punish somebody for something. Usually, like you said, there's suffering that's led to the thing that happened that we feel punishing toward people in. It's ridiculous. Like most people shouldn't even be in jail half the time. And take that just out of jail or prison to our own lives. We do that as people all the time. We punish ourselves rather than heal ourselves. We end up beating ourselves up rather than disciplining ourselves toward the right course of action. And I love I think the mechanisms and the things you're doing, you talk about helping people basically get in touch with their motivations, understand why they did things, how to grow. You're teaching them like you said, self-parenting, self-discipline. There's all these elements that come from it that I think it's a great place to be doing this in. Like you said, it's the shadow of society, this prison system that we have, this incarceration system that we have, and especially in our country here in the United States. That's, what is it, like the top in the world, right? We've got the most people incarcerated of anybody. And it's almost like, what does it say about us as people? There's a lot of needs going unmet, a lot of hurt, a lot of pain. And I think that if we can address the people that are suffering the greatest in some of these systems of oppression, like the prison system, it is so powerful to see how that can just spill out into all of society. And then hopefully someday prisons are much less involved in our world, much less prominent in our world. When people are healing and getting the discipline and structure they need, I don't think we're going to need these systems as much, only for like violent offenders that need to be, protected away from themselves and others.
Well, I think that often what I'm struck by when I'm in a jail or prison, and every time on the way into the classroom where I teach in one jail, there is a door, and over it says holding cell. And it always just strikes me as such a paradox, because I know behind that door, and by the way, the glass is covered up so there's no light going in there, it's all concrete. And there's a steel toilet, and that's someone's holding. And people can spend, their whole day in there waiting to get transported to go to court, or waiting to go on a visit, or waiting to go to prison, and they can get forgotten in there, and there's no holding. And what's so ironic and what's so painful is that the person that's in there really never got the holding that they required in the first place. And had they wouldn't be in there. Because when we are loved, when we know that we are loved, we don't need to harm anybody else. And when we're acting out, when we're even murdering somebody is an act of trying to say, can't you see how much I'm hurting, right? When I don't care about me, I can't care about somebody else. It just seems so logical. And I think really what we need is education, and also to help the people who are part of these systems. There are many really good people in correctional systems who are actually trying to make a difference. This is a system's not set up in that way. So I think that holding people accountable and culpable for what is going on and what the systems actually are, that's important. But we have to be compassionate on both sides, because I don't think anybody really wants to be, nobody wants to cause harm. And I think people are inherently good, but we can sure get out of whack with ourselves.
Susan, what have we not talked about? What have we not asked you about? What is it that you need? And it could be something from the interview you just want to reiterate, but there's a person listening right now. You have their ear. What message can you leave us with as far as this project and this passion that you're working on?
One thing that we're asking everyone to do inside of the project is the one thing I would ask anybody who is curious about this project, or even somebody who's skeptical, and that is to love yourself. Notice what comes up for you with that invitation. Are you resistant? Are you like, hell yeah? What is the thing that happens inside of you? Because that, I think, is an inroad to what this project can offer you, and maybe what you can offer this project. That we are really, really in search of highly developed people who want to come inside and help people take this path back to the best parts of themselves. And that is not for the faint of heart. It's not just for anyone. And we are also finding those people on the inside who do just that against all odds. And they come out and they are amazing. So for the skeptics, I would say if we know that it's hard to love ourselves, imagine how hard it is when you're not sitting in some beautiful workshop with green tea and all the support around you. The people that we work with have nothing like that. They have just themselves and a guide. We know that invitation is the hardest thing and the most worthwhile thing that any one of us could ever do.
This is fantastic, Susan. Thank you so much for being with us on this episode of Personality Hacker. If someone's listening right now and they want to get involved, I'm guessing they can get involved as a volunteer, or I'm guessing you also accept donations. Where's the best place to find out more about getting involved with the Enneagram Prison Project?
Thank you. Yes to both of those things. We are definitely accepting donations because this work, we are a nonprofit and it takes a lot of philanthropy to make it all happen. You can give to Enneagram Prison Project and find out about what we're up to on enneagramprisonproject.org. And our website has a donation page. It also has a guide training page. And we're looking for people who are really have a heart for this work, particularly in the Bay Area where we have the most demand. We have wait lists in every institution where we program. It takes a very developed person. Like I said, we're looking for certified Enneagram teachers and those ones that will come in and learn how we deliver the curriculum on the inside. We're also open to expanding. So if you are somebody who's not in any of the places that I've already mentioned and you feel like you have it in you to create an affiliate or a chapter, please reach out to us because we're so serious about our mission. And our vision is vast.
Thank you so much, Susan, for joining us today and talking about this project that you're so passionate about.
Thank you for the opportunity, really for your heart for what you do and spreading the Enneagram all over the planet. And it's just a real privilege to come and talk about my passion with both of you. Thank you.
And we'll put a link under the show or around the show somewhere you can click on. But again, that's enneagramprisonproject.org. And we want to hear from you. What's been coming up for you in this conversation? Have you gotten some insight into how the Enneagram can be used outside of maybe just typology, in your own personal life? Here's Susan applying it to the prison system, incarceration. Are there other ways that you've seen the Enneagram applied, or has this really lit you up? Are you excited about this? We want to hear from you. What are your thoughts? What are your questions? And what are your stories? We want to hear personal stories from you. You can leave those directly below this show over at personalityhacker.com.
And of course, if you enjoyed the podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. I kind of don't want to take attention away from the Enneagram Prison Project. I think it's a really important one. So
yeah, I
want to just direct your attention back over there to go check them out and volunteer or donate if that's something that you're able to do.
I think your action step today is $5 minimum. We all need to go over and donate to the Enneagram Prison Project. I mean, you can afford $5, right? Find their donation page, enneagramprisonproject.org. That's your action step today. Don't worry about, you don't have to leave ratings and reviews. Just go do this. Let's support this organization. They're using typology for good. That's our action step today. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker Podcast.